everyone. I'm Adam Goldberg, one of the founders of Standard Crypto, a crypto-focused venture capital firm that specializes in seed and Series A investing. I'm super excited to be joined by Stephen Goldfeder, the CEO and co-founder of Off-Chain Labs. And now's actually a really special time to be having this conversation because in recent days, actually on May 15th, Arbitrum gained a record of new addresses in any given day, which is about 175,000. And Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, and even more has happened since then in one day. But congratulations on that milestone. I thought it'd be really interesting to start the conversation, even though Arbitrum is a household name. Just for the uninitiated, can you give everyone a really quick overview of sort of the difference between Arbitrum, Off-Chain Labs, kind of what the commonality is and the differences are?
Hey, absolutely. So Arbitrum is first and foremost the name of the technology stack is Arbitrum Nitro, the current stack, and the Arbitrum actually dates back to Princeton academic work. So myself, Ed, Harry, who are my two co-founders at Off-Chain Labs, were at Princeton, and we started building Arbitrum as an academic project way back when. Actually, Ed started building it even earlier. A few years before I even came into the scene I came in about 2017. Off-Chain Labs was founded in 2018, and that was when I was graduating from Princeton, and we just published the academic paper, and we were ready to commercialize this technology. And for 3 years, we built before really launching any product in production. And then in August of 2021 was the launch of the Arbitrum Mainnet. And most recently, until that point, we were the ones developing the technology. But most recently, in March of this year, the Arbitrum DAO launched and the Arbitrum Foundation launched. And critically, Off-Chain Labs took a step back, and Off-Chain Labs was, with others, a launch partner with the Arbitrum Foundation, and others a launch partner in the Arbitrum DAO. But today, the Arbitrum chains, that's Arbitrum One, is the chain that many people just call Arbitrum, which is like the DeFi stronghold, as well as Arbitrum Nova, which is the gaming chain. Those are managed by the Arbitrum DAO and Foundation, and there's self-executing governance there, which means that the DAO really has control over the chains, or the upgradability of the chains. And so, I can continue to build whatever technology I want. Anyone can, and the only way that technology gets on the live chains is by really having a DAO proposal to do that. Of course, there could be other instances of Arbitrum as well that will be launched. But fundamentally, Off-Chain Labs is really the building a technical stack. And two instances of that are Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova, which are now two DAO-controlled chains and very, very successful chains in their own right.
Yeah, since you bring up DAO governance, I think there's a really interesting question that is quite specific to Arbitrum, which is, how do you handle community governance when hard infra and technical problems are involved, right? It's very different from the types of governance decisions you see going through a lot of DeFi projects or even more kind of socially oriented DAOs. How do you think about the trade-offs here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll answer as a community member, because fundamentally the system exists how it is, and I'll tell you how the system works, and we can discuss the merits of this design and what checks and balances one might want in place on this system. So the way the system works, I mentioned before the concept of self-executing governance. When a technical upgrade is prepared, it can be sent to the DAO. The DAO can actually vote on it on chain, say, hey, here's this upgrade. Do we want to incorporate this in the Arbitrum live chain, whether it's Arbitrum One, Arbitrum Nova, or both? And then there's a vote, and there are quorum requirements, and there's, obviously a yes, no vote, and people can vote and debate that. But I think what you're getting at is sort of one level deeper than that, but a lot of the people voting here might not be able to vet this upgrade. And actually recently this week, there was a case in a different DAO where there was an upgrade that people thought was going to do one thing and did another thing. And I think that's a really important question, not only for Arbitrum, but for DAO governance generally, particularly when there's technical details involved that your average DAO voter may or may not understand. So I think there's a few different answers here. One is the importance of delegation. It's okay to realize and say, hey, I want to participate, but maybe my best way to participate is by delegating my voting power to someone that I think can make the proper decision here. And that's why delegation in DAOs generally is important, Arbitrum as well. one can delegate to themselves and vote themselves, but one should be honest about their ability to weigh the pros and cons, particularly about certain decisions, and delegate, choose wisely about who they want to give that power to if they don't themselves feel qualified. And that's like not a failure in governance at all. A typical representative democracy, comes to mind where it's a very similar structure. We don't directly vote and everything. We're not experts on all these topics, but we entrust others to represent us, and that's one. But it's actually even better than that, because you can actually make sure your representative gets a say, as opposed to sort of it's a yes or no on the representative. But more deeply, I think also there needs to be a series of checks and balances just in the social layer as well. So if someone posts an upgrade and says, "Hey, Arbitrum DAO, consider that," questions that anyone voting should be asking is, was this audited? Who audited this? Can I see the audit report? Etc. Often maybe you'll want more than one team vouching for it, depending on what's happening. And that's, I think, a really important check and balance. So there might be a feature that you think is awesome, but you have to do your technical diligence. And again, it's sort of a weak, they're different, but it's sort of a weak form of delegation as well, where you say, even if I'm going to be voting myself, and even some of these delegates, that might be what they do, right? Even so, your delegate may not be able to actually read the details of the code, but they should make sure that the correct diligence was done, and this is safe to do, and these decisions are safe. Some of it will come down to choice and preference, but anything that comes down to technical security, I think one should make sure that independent and well-regarded experts are consulted.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with your answer. Standard Crypto has been quite involved in, delegating to universities in particular, who we found to be really, really great partners for these types of technical undertakings and governance. But yeah, to shift gears a little bit, I think there's been a lot of talk today around these sort of single player app chain rollups, right? Things that may have custom execution environments or other design choices. Like, how do you think about this trend? Is this a trend you believe in? And if so, what do you think off-chain should do to empower this specific app chain trend?
It's a really interesting question. And I think like all good answers, it really depends. It depends on what the use case is and who you are and what you're doing. So for some people, it might make sense for them to launch an app chain. For others, or other projects, I should say, it probably won't. There's no checkbox and a result. But here are some things one should consider, I think, when thinking, do I want to launch on a public chain, or do I want to build my own app chain? One nice thing about the public chains are, one is the shared security. And there are a lot of people watching and invested and validating, etc. And you'll pay some price for that. And that's the pros and cons, because by investing in the shared security, you're also sharing a chain with these other applications, and you'll pay for validating their use as well. And if one congests, it might congest for you. So there's a pros and cons, but there definitely is a pro having shared security. But even more subtle, and I think something that people often overlook, is shared infrastructure. So think about block explorers or oracles or wallet support. These are things that are really, really important. And you'll take Etherscan, a wonderful team that builds, Ethereum's block explorer, builds Arbitrum's block explorer. It's called Arbiscan, and both block explorers are many in the ecosystem and considered the gold standard for block explorers. I don't think, and I'm not going to speak for Etherscan's strategy, but it seems infeasible that there are going to be thousands or even hundreds of Etherscan instances, and it'll just be something that some chains with enough usage and enough demand will be able to get the the players they need, the infrastructure providers they need, and it also includes nodes like Alchemy and Fura, QuickNode to support their chain. But that's something that one needs to think about. Do I need this infrastructure? And will I be able to attract that infrastructure to the ecosystem? And I think for some, the answer is yes, but it's a high bar. And for many, the answer is likely not. But there are, I don't mean to, be too down on this. I think there are some great applications where a custom chain does make sense, particularly for a project that is very successful and can attract the infrastructure it needs, and maybe doesn't need the synchronous interaction. Because that's the other thing. So much of, say, DeFi is the synchronous interaction. You don't want to be in your own environment. You want to be resident. You want to have a flash loan to A and B, and then swap this. You really want to be where the liquidity is and where the apps are. But if you have a project that doesn't require that and has a lot of users, and you want your sort of own priority lane, it may make a lot of sense. So one example where I think particular vertical where I think will make more sense than others is some enterprise use cases, for like mass market use cases, because one of the problems that crypto has today, and the blockchains have today, is there's some volatility in the usage and the fees. There's congestion at different times, and when you bring in mass market players, you might want that priority lane, that lane where you say this is the capacity dedicated to this app and this use case. And the really cool thing is with Arbitrum technology, the Arbitrum Nitro stack, either roll up or any trust, you could have a priority lane that you can sort of limit who accesses, or you can allow anyone to access. You can decide the permissions of, how permissioned the chain is, the interactions are, but it can still be secured by Ethereum, right? So the secured by Ethereum and priority lane are actually not in direct, contradiction to one another, which is, really cool.
I'm actually curious in terms of that last use case, like what types of things are people building on where you have like what types of apps are people building on that in terms of that priority lane and permissioned access?
I think it's early on. A lot of teams are looking and considering now, but if you look at some, there's take one application that's launched in Arbitrum Nova is Reddit, and today it's 2 communities on Reddit. They have their community points that are live in Arbitrum. If you imagine something to scale the entire Reddit community, or if you imagine something on the scale of transactions processed by some of the largest fintech companies, these are transaction volume, and despite those those numbers that you quoted in the beginning, these are transaction volumes that will make that look small. And the question is, I think they will, so these players want to know that there is the capacity for them. And one of the cool things about rollup is it's really every time you launch a new, say, layer 2 or layer 3, you can use Ethereum to bootstrap the identical capacity. So it's really a very additive effect that you can have, and just keep adding to the capacity while only using a small marginal amount of Ethereum for each of these. And so I think these mass market use cases are probably one of the good, and also, but also. So that's some Web 2 examples, but also some Web 3 examples as well. You can imagine some of the most successful Web 3 projects, whether DeFi projects or NFT projects, that for some of them, I think it's a high bar again, but for some of them, it might they may also be well served by having that priority lane, particularly as demand grows.
Yeah, I think also to go back to your earlier point in terms of app chains and infrastructure and sort of determining whether or not you're, so to speak, important enough to attract dedicated infrastructure. That was a really salient point. That actually reminds me of some of what you've been doing around stylus recently from a very different perspective. And that, right, being EVM compatible was a really, really important feature in terms of enabling developers to seamlessly make the shift over to Arbitrum. I think you launched stylus not too long ago this year. If I understand correctly, right, it's about allowing people to write code in Rust and C and C++. Programming languages and frameworks are certainly one way that you think about expanding market share, but can you kind of give some hints as to what might be coming next in terms of who you're going to bring into the fold for Arbitrum?
Yeah, so I think the one principle here is when building the roll-up layer or the infrastructure layer, the things people want are always you can simplify many different applications and verticals into the same request. For example, no one ever comes and says, hey, this is too cheap. Can you make it a little more expensive? Or, hey, slow this down. It's just too fast, right? Those things. So everyone wants faster, cheaper transactions, more capacity. And the other principle here is bending the tech to the developers rather than asking developers to bend the technology. So one thing I think we fall into a trap of, or at least I do, is you look at the crypto community and you think, wow, it's huge. There's so many people here. It's so varied. This is it. And I think if you zoom out, or fast forward, say 3, 4, 5 years, and be where I imagine we'll be, this is going to be a very, very small, in the larger picture, it's going to be a very, very small piece of the adoption today is going to be a small piece of that. And I think then the question is, you have to think, well, where are the world developers? Where are they? Are they writing Solidity code? We talked about Web 2 companies or fintechs or companies of social media companies. What developer teams do they have? Are they Solidity experts, or are they Rust, C, C++, etc.? And moreover, what library access do they have? Do they have code written already in Solidity or in these other languages? And the answer is these other languages have, in the grand scheme of things, much wider developer adoption as well as much wider library support, etc. And these aren't one or the other. This is additive. So the EVM equivalent of the Arbitrum Nitro stack hasn't gone away with the announcement of Stylus. In fact, it's always going to be there. And this is, a way to say, but let's say that facility doesn't work for you, because today you have other chains. You have move chains, you have some chains that let you write Rust, but it's a decision on the launch of the chain. You say, if I want to be on an EVM chain, I'll go to Ethereum or Arbitrum. If I want to go write Move, I'll go to a Move chain. If I want to go to write Rust, maybe I'll go to Solana or a different chain. But I don't think that should be the deciding factor. I think the chain and the ecosystem should have a certain flavor, and what tools the developer wants to use should be available there to everyone. And the nice thing about Arbitrum Stylus, so Arbitrum Stylus is something that we are working on at Off-Chain Labs. It hasn't. We actually put out an announcement earlier today that internally the fraud proving system for Arbitrum Stylus is ready, and it's quite mature. We expect it to be ready for production later this year, and that will enable, again, the code to bend to developers rather than asking the developers. There are a lot more developers than we realized to bend into the code. And the one thing I'll add, though, is in terms of process, like I said before, we can write whatever code we want on Off-Chain Labs, but ultimately the process here is, if you want to launch a layer-3 app chain, like we discussed with Stylus, that's something which you can do, and anyone can do once this technology is released. But in terms of whether and how and when it gets deployed on Arbitrum One or Arbitrum Nova, that's fully the DAO's decision, and all that we can do is do that due diligence. So, post this upgrade, prepare the audit, show it to the DAO, and say, hey, you should consider this. We think it's awesome. And that's where our role stops and the community steps in, because ultimately the community is the decider of the future of these chains.
I think that makes perfect sense. Well, let's shift to talking a little bit about the future. So I feel like people always point out the dichotomy between optimistic rollups and ZK rollups. Now, I know we and you don't think about it in that way, but how should the audience think about the different flavors of ETH scalability and what the future holds, both the near-term future and the longer-term future?
So starting on something I said before, again, reiterating a certain concept, which is I think we're earlier on than we realized. And I think you can be a ZK maxi today, an optimistic maxi, something else maxi. In 3, 4, 5 years from now, all these technologies are going to develop. And again, the available technology, I can't speak for what will be adopted on an independent chain, but the available technologies will certainly develop. And that's just the way research goes, and particularly research in an area where great minds are pouring in every day. And we're seeing, people fleeing to the space and really excellent researchers and developers. So that's going to happen. And we're seeing that happen already. The pace of innovation is constantly increasing and outpacing what we imagined, even a year ago. That being said, I think that I'll tell you our focus at Off-Chain Labs, what it always has been, it's building the best scaling technology for users today. Building and researching and developing the best technology and putting it out today, because users have a problem today, right? Users need scale today. Users need to solve these problems. They'll also need it tomorrow, but they also need it today. And you want to not say, hey, I'm going to have something ready for you in 3 or 4 or 5 years. You want to say, hey, I have something that's literally, the best solution we can make today, and it's wonderful. And by the way, we're going to keep thinking about how to make it better and faster, because scaling is a bit of a cat and mouse game, right? So you can say, oh, Arbitrum technology, it scales. And it's true for the current demand. But what happens when there's more demand? Actually, Stylus, another thing we didn't talk about in Stylus, is besides for the language benefits, it also has an efficiency benefit. It turns out that writing code in Rust and C and C++ is often much, much more efficient than writing in Solidity. So you'll get a lot more mileage for your gas, if you will, when using some of these features, and you can use the same amount of Ethereum space and maybe increase capacity up to 10x based on some preliminary numbers. So I think it's important to constantly think about this, but there are some out there who have a bit of a different mission. Their mission is, it sounds very similar, but there are some who say our mission is to scale Ethereum using this technology, using, say, ZK proofs. And you can think about it, actually, you can see this in the names of I won't call out anyone in particular, but if you look at the names of us and some of our competitors, some of them have their particular flavor built into them. Some of them have the word ZK or Stark or Snark or Optimistic built into their name. And I think at Off-Chain Labs, that was never the idea. And actually, you can look back at my academic history, and I've been working on ZK proof systems before I was doing anything related to Arbitrum. So there was absolutely no bias against ZK, but the focus was providing a solution that's available to users today. So what does the future hold? I personally think, and I think this is pretty indisputable at this point, first of all, I should say, again, there are fantastic teams building ZK products, really, really fantastic and making amazing progress. And I'm excited to see it as a community member. But it's clear from a cost, a compatibility, and a maturity perspective that these technologies are behind optimistic rollups today. And my personal guess is, we're a breakthrough or two behind, away from these technologies being competitive with optimistic rollups. I could be wrong. That could happen sooner or later than what I thought. But again, I don't have a particular affinity to the Arbitrum technology. I'll give you an example. So Arbitrum Nitro, when Arbitrum Nitro launched, the Arbitrum public chain retired the use of what was called the ARBOS, the initial ARBOS, but also the AVM, or the Arbitrum Virtual Machine. If you look back at our academic paper, the Arbitrum Virtual Machine was one of the crown jewels. And I personally, together with Ed and Harry, spent years working on the designing of this virtual machine. But I was so happy to let it go in place when we figured out a way to build the same thing using the WASM virtual machine, because it is actually a lot more powerful. So I wasn't crying the day that the Arbitrum Nitro launched and the AVM was retired forever. I think we were all celebrating. And it'll be similar, I can tell you in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, there will be better technology available. What I can't tell you is, will that be ZK technology or some other technology or some flavor optimistic technology? But I will tell you that at least I, as a person at Off-Chain Labs, will constantly be thinking about that and trying to not only keep up with it, but also create that future. And if it turns out that ZK technologies mature and they're ready at some point and they can be additive to the optimistic rollup stack, I think I would personally encourage the community to consider using them, because again, I'm here for the result, not here with a particular tool to achieve that result.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because having a community controlled piece of infrastructure allows it to actually be truly enduring, because it's not married to any one piece of technology. It adapts to whatever's best available at that point in time. So I actually want to go back to a point you brought up earlier about delegation being a really good way to empower the community to interpret, both the deep technical problems, but also the governance problems. A question I wanted to ask is, given that some of the ideal delegates are going to be really, really technically skilled people who probably have a plethora of opportunities, available to them within crypto, how do you capture their attention and incentivize and align them to Arbitrum or to a DAO generally, right? What's the right way to incentivize delegates?
It's a great question. So, I personally think that, I know there are some projects that may or may not do this, but paying delegates is probably a bad idea. It doesn't matter who does it. I think it's a bad idea. People have to be interested in the project. They have to have some vested interest, and that can come from a few places, though, right? It could be an application developer that has a live app in Arbitrum, and they care deeply about the ecosystem. And in fact, if you look today at the Arbitrum DAO, some of the largest delegates are the subcommunities. So like GMX and Treasure, for example, are some of the largest delegates on the chain. They can be community research organizations like Blockworks, for example, as another one. And I think we as a community need to figure out how to do this, but I don't think anyone would want to, I think, keeping the independence. So no one party or one interest group is funding this, I think, is always super important. And I think, but the fundamental answer is there have to be people that care about it. The DAO is only as strong as the community and how much it cares. And there's no way to artificially, create that. I think you have to build something revolutionary and build something important. And, in the early days of I say early days, it's funny, it's only been, 2 months maybe, but in the early days of the Arbitrum DAO launch, there was some fierce debate around certain topics. And I think that's a testament to people caring, people writing and reading and engaging in the forums. And so I think in Arbitrum's case, it's the community is fortunate that there is a strong community, and disagreements is okay. So actually, if everyone is agreeing, that we're probably doing something wrong, and we probably don't actually have engaged people. So I think I don't think there's a shortcut here. I think actually building a product that people care about and people want to be engaged with, I think that's critically important. And I think the Arbitrum itself has that, and fundamentally, Arbitrum has that in a recursive way. There are these sub-communities in Arbitrum, I mentioned some of them before, that have overlapping, but also distinct interests, right? They may all want the best, but the core important thing is that they all want the best of the chain. They may have different visions there. I think that lively debate is how you get there, but I don't think there's any shortcut for this, but I think the Arbitrum community is fortunate to have a really wonderful community, and it's one of its, people talk about the technology a lot as a strong point, but I think the community is the second pillar that's equally as strong.
And yeah, speaking of the community, what do you encourage a developer to do to dive into it, right? Where should someone get started?
Great question. So, there are lots of places. There's the Arbitrum developer docs, which is one place if you just want to build. Today, it's an EVM equivalent chain, so that means that everything you use on Ethereum or another EVM chain will translate. But in the future, as we discussed, certainly the technology will be available for other features as well, and it'll be up to the DAO how it includes those features. But there's also, I should say, ways for non-developers to get involved as well. I think one of the sometimes there's like, and I get these DMs all the time, which is like, hey, I'm not a developer. How do I learn Solidity so I can contribute? And my answer to those people is usually like, here's some Solidity resources. For example, Patrick McCory at the Arbitrum Foundation has some wonderful Solidity tutorials and resources. And if you want to learn Solidity, but I also say like, are you sure you want to learn Solidity? Like, you may have other skills that are important here because there's so much, right? We as a company, we as a community really have so much that we need. We need really experts of every type, whether that's researchers, whether that's economists, whether that's finance experts, business experts, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's something that everyone can contribute in this community, and just engaging, like going to the Discords of your favorite projects, talking there, becoming involved in the community, voicing your opinion. The community is only as strong as those individual opinion and that collective voice, and becoming part of that doesn't require you to have any particular development skills.
Cool. I think we might only have time for one more question, so I'll make it an easy and fun one. Do you have a favorite Arbitrum project, or perhaps something you used recently if you don't have a favorite child?
I think I'd get myself in a lot of trouble if I had a favorite Arbitrum project. But I think there are so many wonderful projects in Arbitrum, and I'll tell you the cool thing here. So this is what I know. I'll dodge that question. The cool thing is I go on Twitter every day, and I learn about new Arbitrum projects. Some of them I've heard about, some of them I haven't. Some of them have really good teams behind them, and that's the really cool pace of innovation here. That there's this snowball effect, and the community is just really taken off. And so I love all the Arbitrum. I love all projects in Arbitrum. All the legitimate projects at Arbitrum that are building towards the better scaling future. I think are up there.
Well, cool, Stephen. Thanks so much for doing this. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you to SCB 10X and Bloomberg for having us.
Likewise, thank you.